Joseph was 17 years old when his story began. He was the son of Jacob, later called Israel, and Rachel, born in Jacob's old age. Of all his sons, Jacob loved Joseph most and made him an ornate robe, a coat of many colors that became a symbol of his father's special affection. Joseph's brothers noticed their father's favoritism and grew to hate him. Their resentment deepened when Joseph began sharing his dreams. In the first dream, Joseph and his brothers were binding sheaves of grain in the field when his sheaf rose and stood upright, while their sheaves gathered around and bowed down to his. In the second dream, the sun, moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to him. When Joseph told these dreams to his family, his brothers became even more jealous, and even his father rebuked him, asking, "Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" Yet Jacob kept the matter in mind. One day, Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers who were grazing their flocks near Shechem. After searching, Joseph found them in Dothan. When they saw him approaching in his colorful robe, they plotted against him, saying, "Here comes that dreamer. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns." However, Reuben, the eldest, intervened to save Joseph's life, suggesting they throw him into a cistern without harming him, secretly planning to rescue him later. When Joseph arrived, his brothers stripped him of his robe and threw him into an empty cistern. As they sat down to eat, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelite merchants coming from Gilead, their camels loaded with spices, balm and myrrh, heading to Egypt. Judah suggested they sell Joseph rather than kill him, saying, "What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites." They pulled Joseph up from the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the cistern and found Joseph gone, he tore his clothes in distress. To deceive their father, the brothers took Joseph's robe, dipped it in goat's blood, and brought it to Jacob, saying they had found it. Jacob recognized it immediately and concluded that Joseph had been devoured by a wild animal. He mourned for his son many days, refusing to be comforted. In Egypt, Joseph was bought by Potiphar, an Egyptian official and captain of Pharaoh's guard. The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered in everything he did while serving in Potiphar's household. Recognizing that the Lord was with Joseph and made everything successful under his care, Potiphar put him in charge of his entire household and all his possessions. From the time Potiphar appointed Joseph as overseer, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's household for Joseph's sake. The blessing extended to everything Potiphar owned, both in the house and in the field. Potiphar left everything in Joseph's care and concerned himself with nothing except the food he ate. Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while, Potiphar's wife took notice of him and said, "Come to bed with me." But Joseph refused, explaining to her, "My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. One day when Joseph went into the house to attend to his duties and none of the household servants were inside, she caught him by his cloak and said, "Come to bed with me." But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. Seeing that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called to her household servants and said, "Look, this Hebrew has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. When he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house." When Potiphar heard his wife's story, he burned with anger and put Joseph in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. Even in prison, the Lord was with Joseph and showed him kindness. The Lord gave Joseph favor in the eyes of the prison warden, who put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners and made him responsible for everything done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Some time later, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker were imprisoned in the same prison where Joseph was confined. Both men had dreams on the same night, and each dream had its own meaning. When Joseph saw them the next morning, he noticed they were dejected and asked why their faces were so sad. They replied, "We both had dreams, but there is no one to interpret them." Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." The cupbearer told his dream first. He saw a vine with 3 branches that budded, blossomed and produced clusters of ripe grapes. He took grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Joseph interpreted, "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer." Joseph then asked the cupbearer to remember him when things went well, and to mention him to Pharaoh to get him out of prison, explaining that he had been kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews and had done nothing to deserve imprisonment. The baker, encouraged by the favorable interpretation, told his dream he had 3 baskets of bread on his head, with all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh in the top basket, but birds were eating them. Joseph interpreted, "The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh." 3 days later, on Pharaoh's birthday, he gave a feast for all his officials. He restored the cupbearer to his position, but impaled the baker, just as Joseph had interpreted. However, the cupbearer forgot about Joseph and did not mention him. 2 full years passed before the cupbearer remembered Joseph. Pharaoh had 2 troubling dreams that none of his magicians or wise men could interpret. In the first dream, 7 fat, healthy cows came up from the Nile, followed by 7 lean, ugly cows that ate the fat cows but remained just as lean. In the second dream, 7 healthy, full heads of grain grew on a single stalk, followed by 7 thin, scorched heads that swallowed up the healthy ones. When the cupbearer heard about Pharaoh's distress, he finally remembered Joseph and told Pharaoh about the Hebrew slave who had correctly interpreted dreams in prison. Pharaoh immediately sent for Joseph, who was quickly brought from the dungeon, shaved, changed his clothes, and appeared before Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I had a dream, and no one can interpret it, but I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream you can interpret it." Joseph replied, "I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." After Pharaoh recounted his dreams, Joseph explained that both dreams had the same meaning. God was revealing to Pharaoh what he was about to do. The 7 good cows and 7 good heads of grain represented 7 years of great abundance throughout Egypt. The 7 lean cows and 7 worthless heads of grain represented 7 years of famine that would follow and consume all the abundance. Joseph advised Pharaoh to find a discerning and wise man to put in charge of Egypt, along with commissioners to collect 1/5 of the harvest during the 7 good years. This food should be stored under Pharaoh's authority in the cities for use during the 7 years of famine that would follow. The plan seemed good to Pharaoh and all his officials. Pharaoh asked, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" He said to Joseph, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger, dressed him in robes of fine linen, put a gold chain around his neck, and had him ride in a chariot as his second in command. People shouted, "Make way before him." Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zaphenath-Paneah and gave him Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, a priest of On, to be his wife. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentifully, and Joseph collected all the food produced in Egypt and stored it in the cities. The quantity of grain was like the sand of the sea, so much that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure. Before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh, saying, "It is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household." The second son he named Ephraim, saying, "It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." When the 7 years of abundance ended, the 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had said. There was famine in all the other lands, but in Egypt there was food. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, people cried to Pharaoh for food. Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph and do what he tells you." The famine was severe throughout the world, so people from all countries came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph. When Jacob learned there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you just keep looking at each other? I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us, so that we may live and not die." So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt, but Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's younger brother, with the others because he was afraid that harm might come to him. Joseph was the governor of the land and sold grain to all its people. When Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground, fulfilling his childhood dreams. Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Joseph spoke harshly to them and accused them of being spies. They protested their innocence, explaining they were 12 brothers from Canaan, with the youngest at home and one no longer living. To test their honesty, Joseph demanded they bring their youngest brother to Egypt, keeping Simeon as a hostage until they returned. Joseph secretly gave orders to fill their sacks with grain and to put each man's silver back in his sack, along with provisions for their journey. When they discovered the silver, they were frightened and wondered what God was doing to them. Back in Canaan, they told Jacob everything that had happened. Jacob was devastated at the thought of losing Benjamin as well, saying, "You have deprived me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me." Reuben offered to put his own 2 sons to death if he didn't bring Benjamin back safely, but Jacob refused to let Benjamin go. The famine continued to be severe, and when they had eaten all the grain from Egypt, Jacob told his sons to go back and buy more food. Judah reminded him that the man had warned them not to appear before him again without their brother. He offered to guarantee Benjamin's safety with his own life. Finally, Jacob agreed, telling them to take gifts for the man: balm, honey, spices, myrrh, pistachio nuts, and almonds, along with double the amount of silver. "May God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, so that he will let your other brother and Benjamin come back with you." When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he told his steward to prepare a feast. The brothers were terrified, thinking they were being brought to Joseph's house because of the silver that had been returned in their sacks. They explained the situation to the steward, who reassured them, saying their God had given them treasure in their sacks. Joseph brought Simeon out to them, and when Joseph came home, they presented their gifts and bowed down before him. Joseph asked about their welfare and their aged father, and when he saw Benjamin, he was deeply moved and had to hurry out to weep in private. During the meal, Joseph served them personally, with Benjamin receiving 5 times as much food as the others. Joseph then instructed his steward to fill their sacks with food and put each man's silver in his sack, but to put Joseph's special silver cup in Benjamin's sack. The next morning the brothers started on their way, but Joseph sent his steward after them to accuse them of stealing his cup. They protested their innocence and said whoever was found with the cup would die, and the rest would become slaves. When the cup was found in Benjamin's sack, They were devastated and returned to the city. When they appeared before Joseph, Judah stepped forward and made an impassioned plea, offering to remain as a slave in place of Benjamin. He explained how much Benjamin meant to their father and how Jacob's life was bound up in the boy's life. Judah concluded, "Now then, please let your servant remain here as my lord's slave in place of the boy, and let the boy return with his brothers." Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants and cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. He wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said, "Come close to me." And when they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you." Joseph explained that God had sent him ahead of them to preserve their lives during the famine, which would continue for 5 more years. "So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household and ruler of all Egypt." Joseph told them to hurry back to their father and tell him that God had made Joseph lord of all Egypt. They should bring Jacob and all their households to Egypt, where Joseph would provide for them during the remaining years of famine. He embraced Benjamin and wept, then kissed all his brothers and wept over them. When the news reached Pharaoh's palace that Joseph's brothers had come, Pharaoh was pleased and told Joseph to have his brothers load their animals and return to Canaan to get their father and their families. Pharaoh promised to give them the best land in Egypt. Joseph gave them carts for transportation, provisions for their journey, and new clothing. To Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 sets of clothes. To his father he sent 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread and other provisions. When they told Jacob that Joseph was still alive and was ruler of all Egypt, Jacob was stunned and did not believe them. But when they told him everything Joseph had said and he saw the carts Joseph had sent, Jacob's spirit revived. "I'm convinced," he said. "My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." Israel set out with all that belonged to him, and when he reached Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. God spoke to Israel in a vision at night, "Jacob, Jacob." And he replied, "Here I am." Then God said, "I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again." The total number of Jacob's descendants who came to Egypt was 70. Joseph took his chariot and went to Goshen to meet his father Israel. As soon as Joseph appeared before him, he threw his arms around his father and wept for a long time. Israel said to Joseph, "Now I am ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive." Joseph brought 5 of his brothers to present them to Pharaoh. When Pharaoh asked about their occupation, they said they were shepherds, as their fathers had been. They requested to settle in Goshen because the famine was severe in Canaan, and their flocks needed pasture. Pharaoh agreed and told Joseph to settle his father and brothers in the best part of the land. Joseph also brought his father Jacob and presented him to Pharaoh. Jacob blessed Pharaoh and told him he was 130 years old. After blessing Pharaoh again, Jacob left his presence. Joseph settled his father and brothers in the district of Ramesses, as Pharaoh directed, and provided them with food according to the number of their children. The famine was severe, and there was no food anywhere. Joseph collected all the money in Egypt and Canaan in payment for grain, and he brought it to Pharaoh's palace. When the money ran out, the people came to Joseph saying they had nothing left but their livestock and land. Joseph bought all their livestock for food, then their land, making them servants to Pharaoh. Joseph established a law that a fifth of the produce would belong to Pharaoh, and this law continued in Egypt. Only the land of the priests was not bought, because they received a regular allotment from Pharaoh. The Israelites settled in Egypt, in the region of Goshen, acquired property there, and were fruitful and increased greatly in number. Jacob lived in Egypt 17 years, reaching the age of 147. When the time drew near for Israel to die, he called for Joseph, and made him swear to bury him in the land of his fathers, not in Egypt. Joseph promised to do as his father asked. Some time later, Joseph was told his father was ill. He took his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, to see Jacob. Despite his age and failing eyesight, Jacob blessed Joseph's sons, crossing his hands to give the greater blessing to Ephraim, the younger, over Manasseh, the firstborn. Jacob called all his sons together and gave each of them a prophetic blessing. About Joseph he said, "Joseph is a fruitful vine near a spring, whose branches climb over a wall. With bitterness archers attacked him, they shot at him with hostility. But his bow remained steady, his strong arm stayed limber, because of the hand of the mighty one of Jacob. Your father's blessings are greater than the blessings of the ancient mountains, than the bounty of the age-old hills. Let all these rest on the head of Joseph, on the brow of the prince among his brothers." After Jacob finished giving instructions to his sons, he drew his feet up into the bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. Joseph threw himself on his father, and wept over him and kissed him. Then Joseph directed his physicians to embalm his father Israel, which took 40 days. The Egyptians mourned for him 70 days. When the period of mourning was over, Joseph spoke to Pharaoh's court, asking permission to go to Canaan to bury his father as he had promised. Pharaoh granted permission, and Joseph went up with a large company of Egyptian officials, his brothers, and his father's household. They held a great and solemn ceremony of mourning at the threshing floor of Atad, mourning for 7 days. Then they carried Jacob to Canaan and buried him in the cave in the field of Machpelah, which Abraham had bought as a burial place. After their father's death, Joseph's brothers were afraid that Joseph would now take revenge on them for what they had done to him years earlier. They sent word to Joseph claiming that Jacob had left instructions for Joseph to forgive his brothers' sins. When Joseph received this message, he wept. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him, saying, "We are your slaves." But Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children." And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. Joseph remained in Egypt with all his father's family. He lived 110 years and saw the 3rd generation of Ephraim's children. The children of Machir, son of Manasseh, were also brought up on Joseph's knees. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "I am about to die. But God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Joseph made the Israelites swear an oath, "God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place." So Joseph died at the age of 110. They embalmed him and placed him in a coffin in Egypt. The story of Joseph demonstrates God's sovereignty and faithfulness, showing how God can work through even the worst circumstances to accomplish his purposes. Joseph's journey from favored son to slave to prisoner to ruler illustrates themes of forgiveness, redemption, and divine providence that resonate throughout Scripture. If this story has blessed you, don't forget to subscribe for more biblical stories of the Bible. Like, drop your comment, and share with someone.